You need to hear this, not because it is dramatic, not because it is loud, but because it is quiet and true in a way that reaches the parts of you most people never see. Imagine a woman who has lived long enough to watch the world change many times, a woman who has raised children through uncertainty, criticism, poverty, courage, and impossible dreams. Imagine a mother who has stood behind a son the world now watches closely, not dazzled by his fame, not intimidated by his critics, but grounded in something deeper than success. This message does not come from a stage, it does not come from headlines, and it does not come from money or power. It comes from lived experience, from a mother's heart, and from a lifetime of watching how fragile and how strong human beings truly are. She would begin by saying that the world often mistakes confidence for arrogance and silence for weakness. She has watched people judge before they understand, speak before they listen, and abandon themselves in order to be accepted. She would tell you that the most dangerous thing you can do is try to live someone else's version of success. She knows this because she lived through seasons where survival mattered more than applause, where courage meant waking up one more day and refusing to let fear decide her future. She would tell you that if you are tired, it does not mean you are failing. It means you have been carrying something heavy for a long time. She would speak to you about pressure, because she knows what it does to people. Pressure does not always come from enemies, often it comes from expectations. Expectations of family, society, culture, and even yourself. She would tell you that pressure can either crush you or refine you, and the difference lies in whether you allow it to disconnect you from who you really are. She has seen what happens when people chase approval until they no longer recognize themselves in the mirror. She would warn you gently that applause fades, trends change, and public opinion is unstable, but character remains when everything else disappears. She would tell you that the world loves results but ignores the process. People celebrate outcomes while overlooking the years of loneliness, rejection, and uncertainty that came before them. She knows that most breakthroughs are born in silence, when no one is watching and no one is cheering. She would say that if you feel unseen right now, you are not forgotten. Often, the most important growth happens when there is no audience. Roots grow in darkness before they ever break the surface. She would talk about fear, not as something shameful, but as something honest. Fear shows you where you care. Fear reveals what matters. She would say that courage is not the absence of fear, it is the decision to move forward despite it. She has watched people with brilliant minds give up because they were afraid of failing publicly. She would remind you that failing quietly while learning is far more powerful than succeeding loudly without growth. She would speak about resilience, because life tested her in ways few people saw. She would say that resilience is not about pretending everything is fine. It is about standing back up without bitterness. It is about refusing to let pain turn you into someone unrecognizable. She would tell you that some of the strongest people she knows cried in private and smiled in public, not because they were fake, but because they were choosing hope over despair one day at a time. She would look at you and say that comparison is one of the fastest ways to lose yourself. She has watched how comparing journeys steals joy and distorts reality. You never see the full story behind someone else's success, and you rarely see the cost they paid to get there. She would tell you to stop measuring your life against highlights that were never meant to define you. Your path is allowed to look different. Your timing is allowed to be slower. Your story is allowed to unfold in ways others do not understand. She would speak honestly about discipline, because talent alone never carries anyone far. Discipline is choosing what matters most over what feels good in the moment. She would say that discipline is an act of self-respect. It is showing up when motivation is gone. It is keeping promises to yourself even when no one else knows. She would tell you that small, consistent actions shape futures more than dramatic, one-time decisions. She would talk about humility, not as weakness, but as strength. Humility allows you to learn, to listen, and to grow. She has seen how pride isolates people and how humility builds bridges. She would remind you that you can be confident without being cruel, ambitious without being careless, and strong without being loud. She would tell you that life will not always make sense while you are living it. There will be seasons that feel wasted, delays that feel unfair, and losses that feel permanent. She would say that meaning often appears later, when you look back and realize that what felt like an obstacle was actually preparation. She would encourage you not to rush your healing or your growth just to meet someone else's timeline. She would speak about identity, because she knows how easily people attach their worth to achievements. She would tell you that you are not your job, your bank account, your relationship status, or your mistakes. She would say that if everything external were stripped away, your value would still remain. She would urge you to build your life on something deeper than praise, because praise can disappear overnight. She would talk about criticism, because she has seen how harsh the world can be. She would say that not all criticism deserves your attention. Some opinions are reflections of other people's fears, not your flaws. She would encourage you to listen carefully, learn what is useful, and release what is destructive. You do not need to carry every voice with you. She would tell you that loneliness does not mean you are unlovable. Sometimes it means you are becoming someone who no longer fits into old spaces. Growth often requires separation. She would say that the right connections arrive when you stop trying to force them and start becoming authentic. You were never meant to shrink to be accepted. She would speak about patience, because she knows how rare it has become. She would say that patience is not passive, it is active trust. It is continuing to prepare even when the opportunity has not arrived yet. She would remind you that some things cannot be rushed without being ruined. She would talk about responsibility, because freedom without responsibility is empty. She would say that taking ownership of your choices is empowering, not limiting. Blame keeps you stuck, but responsibility moves you forward. She would encourage you to stop waiting for permission to become who you know you are meant to be. She would speak about love, not the kind that demands perfection, but the kind that allows growth. She would say that real love does not control, belittle, or compete. It supports, challenges, and believes. She would encourage you to choose relationships that make you braver, not smaller. She would tell you that success without peace is a poor trade. She has seen people gain everything they wanted and lose themselves in the process. She would say that rest is not laziness, and reflection is not weakness. You are allowed to pause without quitting. She would speak about purpose, not as a grand title, but as daily faithfulness. Purpose is found in how you treat people, how you respond to difficulty, and how you show up when it would be easier to disappear. She would say that impact is often quieter than you expect. She would remind you that your past does not disqualify you. It informs you. Mistakes are not life sentences, they are lessons. She would tell you that shame thrives in silence. But growth begins with honesty. She would speak about courage again, because it matters so deeply. Courage is telling the truth when it would be easier to lie. Courage is starting over when staying stuck feels safer. Courage is choosing integrity when shortcuts are available. She would tell you that you do not need to have everything figured out to begin. Clarity often comes through action, not before it. She would encourage you to take the next right step, even if it is small. She would speak about legacy, not as something reserved for famous people, but as something everyone leaves behind. Legacy is how people feel after interacting with you. It is the kindness you show, the honesty you live, and the example you set. She would look at you with sincerity and say that the world needs people who think deeply, care genuinely, and act responsibly. She would say that your voice matters, even if it shakes. Your ideas matter, even if they are not fully formed yet. She would tell you that resilience is built when you choose hope repeatedly, not once. Hope is not naive, it is disciplined optimism. It is believing that effort matters even when outcomes are uncertain. She would remind you that you are allowed to redefine success. You are allowed to choose a life that aligns with your values instead of chasing someone else's dream. She would say that fulfillment comes from alignment, not applause. She would speak about learning, because curiosity keeps you alive. She would encourage you to keep asking questions, to keep reading, to keep growing. Stagnation is more dangerous than failure. She would tell you that kindness is never wasted. Even when it is not returned, it shapes who you become. She would say that the strongest people she knows remained kind in a world that gave them reasons to harden. She would end by telling you that you are stronger than you think, more capable than you believe, and more prepared than you realize. She would say that this season, whatever it, she would continue, softer now, as if she knows you are still listening even if your heart is tired. She would say that there are moments in life when you feel delayed, when it seems like everyone else is moving ahead while you are standing still. She would tell you not to confuse stillness with stagnation. Sometimes life pauses you because something inside you needs strengthening before the next step. A bridge is reinforced most where it will bear the greatest weight. She would speak about uncertainty, because she knows how uncomfortable it feels to not know what comes next. She would say that uncertainty is not your enemy, it is the space where creativity and faith are born. If everything were predictable, there would be no room for growth. She would remind you that even the most confident paths once began as unclear directions. She would tell you that people often misunderstand persistence. Persistence is not stubbornly doing the same thing forever. It is learning, adjusting, and continuing anyway. She would say that wisdom is knowing when to push forward and when to pause and reflect. Both require strength. She would talk about inner voice, because she has watched too many people silence themselves. She would encourage you to listen carefully to that quiet sense inside you that knows when something is right or wrong. That voice is often drowned out by noise, opinions, and fear, but it rarely lies. She would tell you to protect it. She would speak about failure again, but this time differently. She would say failure is not the opposite of success, it is part of it. The only true failure is refusing to learn. She would tell you that mistakes are not proof you are incapable, they are proof you are trying. She would remind you that not everyone who doubts you is against you. Sometimes people project their own limits onto you. She would say that their disbelief does not define your ceiling. You are allowed to outgrow the expectations others placed on you. She would talk about solitude, because she knows how lonely growth can feel. She would say solitude is not punishment, it is preparation. It is in quiet moments that clarity forms and strength deepens. She would tell you not to fear being alone for a season if it means becoming whole. She would speak about balance, because ambition without balance eventually burns out. She would encourage you to care for your body, your mind, and your spirit. She would say rest is not something you earn after exhaustion, it is something you need to sustain purpose. She would tell you that the world often rewards speed but overlooks depth. She would encourage you to choose depth anyway. Deep understanding, deep character, deep compassion. These things last when trends fade. She would speak about courage in relationships. She would say it takes courage to be honest, to set boundaries, and to walk away from what diminishes you. She would remind you that staying in something harmful is not loyalty, it is neglecting yourself. She would talk about gratitude, not as denial of pain, but as recognition of resilience. Gratitude helps you remember how far you have come. She would say that even in difficulty, there are lessons shaping you for something more meaningful. She would tell you that your story does not need to be dramatic to be significant. Ordinary consistency often changes lives more than extraordinary moments. She would encourage you to show up, even on days when nothing feels remarkable. She would speak about integrity again, because it matters deeply. Integrity is doing the right thing when it costs you something. She would say that shortcuts may seem tempting, but they often steal more than they give. She would remind you that learning never ends. Even success requires humility to remain sustainable. She would encourage you to stay teachable, to listen to people who challenge you respectfully, and to remain curious rather than defensive. She would tell you that strength is quiet most of the time. It is choosing patience over reaction, clarity over chaos, and purpose over impulse. She would say that true power does not need constant validation. She would talk about legacy once more, gently this time. She would say legacy is built in daily choices, not grand announcements. It is in how you treat people who can do nothing for you. It is in how you speak when no one is recording. She would remind you that hope is a discipline. It is choosing to believe that effort matters, that growth is possible, and that tomorrow can be different. Hope does not ignore reality, it faces it with resolve. She would say that you do not have to become someone else to matter. The world already has enough copies. What it lacks is people willing to be authentic, thoughtful, and responsible. She would encourage you to forgive yourself. Carrying guilt for past decisions only drains the energy you need for future ones. She would say that self-forgiveness is not excusing mistakes. It is allowing yourself to move forward wiser. She would tell you that beginnings are often disguised as endings. What you are grieving now may be making space for something you cannot yet imagine. She would encourage you to trust the process even when it feels uncomfortable. She would speak about courage one last time, slowly. Courage is choosing alignment over approval. Courage is continuing when the outcome is uncertain. Courage is being gentle in a harsh world, and she would leave you with this quiet truth: your life does not need to impress everyone. It needs to make sense to you. If you live honestly, grow intentionally, and treat people with dignity, you will have succeeded in ways no headline can measure. She would end it the way only someone with lived wisdom can, not by elevating herself, not by speaking louder, but by grounding you. She would say that life has a way of revealing who you are when no one is watching. Titles fall away. Attention fades. What remains is the way you treated people, the way you treated yourself, and the choices you made when it would have been easier to look the other way. She would remind you that strength is not proven in moments of applause but in moments of doubt. Anyone can feel confident when everything is going well. Character is revealed when plans fall apart and you must decide whether to become bitter or better. She would tell you that hardship does not ruin people. Avoidance of responsibility does. She would speak about truth, because truth is uncomfortable but freeing. She would say that lies may protect you temporarily, but they imprison you slowly. Living honestly may cost you in the short term, but it builds a foundation that cannot be shaken. She would encourage you to be honest with yourself first, because self-deception is the most dangerous kind. She would talk about growth again, but this time with compassion. Growth is rarely linear. You will have days where you feel strong and days where you feel like you have gone backward. She would tell you that setbacks do not erase progress. They are part of learning how to move forward more wisely. She would remind you that you are allowed to change your mind. Changing your direction does not mean you failed, it means you learned. Stubbornly clinging to something that no longer aligns with who you are is not perseverance, it is fear wearing discipline's mask. She would speak about responsibility one final time, because it is the quiet foundation of freedom. When you take responsibility for your actions, your reactions, and your growth, you reclaim your power. Waiting for someone else to save you keeps you dependent. Choosing to act keeps you alive. She would tell you that the world will always have noise. Opinions will come and go. Praise and criticism will rise and fall. If you build your identity on any of these, you will always feel unstable. She would urge you to anchor yourself in values instead of validation. She would speak about humility again, gently. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. It allows you to listen, to learn, and to adapt without losing confidence. She would say that the most effective people she has known never needed to announce their importance. She would remind you that courage sometimes looks like persistence, but sometimes it looks like letting go. Letting go of old narratives, old resentments, old versions of yourself that no longer fit. Growth requires space, and space often comes from release. She would talk about kindness one last time, because it is often misunderstood. Kindness is not weakness. It is strength under control. It is choosing humanity in a world that often rewards indifference. She would tell you that kindness builds influence that power alone never can. She would say that success achieved at the cost of your health, your peace, or your integrity is not success at all. You are not meant to live constantly exhausted, constantly proving, constantly chasing. A meaningful life has rhythm, not just speed. She would encourage you to trust yourself more. You have survived more than you think. You have adapted, learned, and continued even when it was hard. She would say that evidence of your resilience already exists in your story. She would remind you that you do not owe the world perfection. You owe it sincerity. Show up willing to learn. Show up willing to grow. Show up willing to take responsibility for your impact. She would say that your future is shaped less by one big decision and more by thousands of small ones. How you speak. How you listen. How you respond when frustrated. These moments quietly build who you become. She would leave you with a final, serious truth, the kind that stays with you long after the words end. You cannot control everything that happens to you, but you can control who you become because of it. That choice is always yours, and that is why you needed to hear this, not because it promises ease. Not because it guarantees success, but because it calls you back to yourself, to live intentionally, to think deeply, to act responsibly, to remain human in a world that often forgets how. when the noise fades, when the attention moves on, when the moment passes, you will still be here. Make sure the person standing there is someone you respect.